Now, when we're here, we're actually going to try to think time with trees. Curious. I will actually take you to an island in Sweden's second largest lake, to Visingsö, where one can find the country's major oak forest. These trees were planted some 200 years ago, and the idea was to have timbers for future warships. These trees were born at a time when oaks were becoming really scarce in the country. And time went on, and the trees were ready to harvest in 1975. And the head of the Navy was approached with the offer of these trees, but the offer was declined because warships were no longer built of wood. They were built of metal and plastics and lots of other materials. At the time when the trees were harvested, times were not what they used to be, and the future that actually had arrived was rather unexpected. In our environmentally challenged world, with global heating and the degrading environment, we actually need to think time very differently. We often think time as a sort of line with the past and present and the future. And we lead our lives under the assumption that time will actually continue smoothly. And this would, of course, ease planning cycles and also give us some more peace of mind. But time doesn't necessarily work this way. I think we need to prepare ourselves to live in environmentally disturbed worlds. And there is a need to find new ways of building relations across time in ways that cares both for human and non-human relations. In these times, we need both to think longer and we also need to think wider than ever before. And thinking time with trees can actually help us. The people who planted the trees at Visingsö were on the brink of industrialization. Now we are living in the times when industrialization has accelerated a lot. Industries and building processes use energy and extract resources at a magnitude and speed never seen before. And animals and plants are handled as goods on a global market. And more areas are claimed for consumption and production. And the places of refuge for humans and non-humans are decreasing. There is no doubt that greenhouse gases warm the planet and that there are deposits of plastic, soot and concrete that will have lasting impact on the layers of the earth. And in fact, humans, animals, plants and trees are under extreme pressure as the planet is struck with fever. What we call and how we respond to these challenging times differ. But one thing is sure, as writer Margaret Atwood says, it's not climate change, it's everything change. You might all have heard about the Anthropocene, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. It has a too anthropocentric note for our purpose today. That is, it's too human-centered. Donna Haraway has given the mysterious name the Catholicism to these times we're living in. And she has emphasized that we cannot see humanity as separate from planet Earth. Hence, we need to acknowledge that we co-create the world with several non-human others. Hence, we have to stay with the troubles of living together in unruly realities of climate change, where evolution will have problems in running fast enough to adjust to a warming world. However, this name, the Catholicism, is also an epoch that holds the potential for things being otherwise. It actually holds a historical movement that can change long-term history in ways that doesn't lock in and decrease future livability on this planet. So, what can we then learn from the Oaks of Visingsö about times and situations where the future doesn't really arrive as planned? And how is it possible to think time with trees and all their relations? Well, first of all, trees, like the ones at Visingsö, have really long life cycles. They live for 100 years or more. And they can actually help us to think the long term a little bit better. Not only thinking about future markets or military endeavors that have gone completely wrong. Thinking with trees can also, as Julia Nordblad helps us with, to keep an eye on the often under-communicated politics of the long term. Likewise, environmental humanities scholar Rob Nixon highlights that climate change, toxicity, and deforestation stretch over long periods of time. They create a sort of slow violence, which is hardly noticed in society on a day-to-day basis and doesn't always invite to political action. Furthermore, thinking with trees. Trees are, of course, not only individuals. They are part of a much more wide-ranging wood wide web. Their fibrous bodies are often connected through underworld systems where their roots and mycelium feed nutrition and water to the tree, and the tree places carbon in the soil. Trees also produce oxygen, and they are life essential and entangled with all life on Earth. This web of connections are made, unmade, and remade, and we're only beginning to understand and comprehend the complexity of forest dynamics. But a tree is always more than a tree. And trees and forest ecosystems have their implications for how we work with time. Time, as we said, doesn't only flow from the past into the future. If we burn fossil fuels now, and this is an action that both happens in the now, but it also happens then in the future. Actions spread out in time, and they can have a lasting impact on the future. It, so to say, territorializes the future. But that also means that we can actually deterritorialize the future as a practice of trans-temporal care between human and non-human generations. Furthermore, time is not only ticking, as it does in a clock. But time is also relational, as time philosopher Michel Bastian says. I will give you an example of relational time to think with. Think, for example, of a taxi driver who will need to structure their lives after, let's say, a businesswoman. The taxi driver will have to wait around and then order their working days after the wishes of this businesswoman. And, of course, there are lots of power structures and hierarchies in the way we spend time with others. And that is what comes clear when we talk about relational time. So then, back to the trees and the forests. Trees and plants synchronize with light and with rain and nutrition cycles. And with global warming, such time relations are increasingly getting out of sync. Flowers, for example, have started to bloom 2 times in a summer. And this mightn't at all synchronize with pollen and with pollination and bees. And forest ecologist Alm Gnista have made me very aware of the problems that trees are starting to experience right now. They have problems with overwintering. They don't know when to shed their leaves. They don't know when to go into hibernation, create buds, and when to start opening up these buds. Such processes require a certain number of cool days in the year, and such cool days will become scarcer in a future warming world. That means that the trees will not be able to tell time correctly from temperature, as they do. Also, trees and plants and forests can actually become temporally confused. Now, time again. Time is something we make, but we don't make time on our own, as we have seen in these examples. Time is a co-creation that sets up or breaks relations, and time is made with a multitude of other agencies: machines, humans, animals, rivers, temperature and light, and of course, trees. Trees entwine together in the making of situated worlds. And comes the question, of course, how do we build such relations? We can do that through care, actually, which is, according to Johan Tronto, all things we do to maintain and to repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible together. We can spend time with and care for some relations, or neglect or abandon other relations that do not work out. Time is made ongoingly through the braiding of relations where any point can be connected to any point. However, there are many unknown relations in such trans-temporal webs, and that could be exemplified, for example, in what we call the cascade effects. Cascade effects happen when a particular chain of events is set in motion that spreads very quickly and unpredictably through the ecosystem. In these challenging times, we can be inspired by Hannah Arendt and say, thinking is to let the mind go visiting. These damaged times need new ways of working that are not primarily anthropocentric. And most likely, we need to go visiting and befriend not only other species, but also the unknown and the unexpected, not the least to build up a mental resilience for futures to come. Haraway talks about how we can practice responsibility. Such response is asked for even if we don't know or cannot predict exactly what is happening. We need to take action even if not all information is at hand. Thinking time with trees means to take in that our choices today have a lasting impact, and that we need to train our ability to respond to both present and future generations. And what we do today affects the life worlds of several human and non-human others for 30, 100 or thousands of years ahead. We are entangled across time and generations, to whom we must train our ability to respond by letting our minds go visiting them, as well as several other unknown others. Times are not what they used to be, and time is made through relating with sometimes others, such as trees. This is the first time in history that human action has had such forceful effects to move the arrival of the next ice age. But it's also the time when we can think with trees and their networks to understand how we can synchronize our actions with the environment and more than human generations better and practice care. Now is also the time where one can change long-term relations for the better by keeping an eye on the politics of the long term and start to deterritorialize the future and to befriend the unknown. And I do urge us to do so sooner rather than later.